I'll continue reading our Communist Manifesto. During the last read, you can't help but feel that this entire thing is a masturbation, a very supercilious masturbation by the haughty Karl Marx. He was pontificating. He was just saying that, oh, the revolution by proletariat is inevitable. He said that it is because bourgeoisie mostly failed to maintain the slavish existence of proletariat. And he said that most most history, most part most parts of the history is about a class that is oppressing another, and another is a class that is being oppressed. Most history is about that. Karl Marx mentioned that. And in order for a oppressing powerful class to oppress an oppressed class, it must at least maintain the existence of the oppressed class. For example, in feudal societies, the landlords could easily strangle and manipulate and exploit the serf. And Karl Marx, in this Communist Manifesto, said that most of the time bourgeoisie couldn't maintain the stability, the slave status of proletariat, and proletariat would form union and would revolt, and then therefore it's inevitable. And of course, during my last read, I entered chapter 2 about proletarians and communists, and Marx started this chapter by saying by glorifying, extolling, espousing a lot of great things about communism, a lot of very meaningful double speak. Marx said that communism is not about abolition of property in general. It's only about the abolition of exploitation by bourgeoisie. Theoretically, that is really great. However, in practice, it is so hard to distinguish what is abolition of property in entirety versus abolition of exploitation of property by bourgeoisie. Is very hard to distinguish, and most of the time, if you start appropriating and pointing a gun at a bourgeoisie and appropriate his property, you end up misappropriating too much of the property of the society. And of course, Marx also said what basically he was saying that communism is an ideology that would be able to liberate the workers. I'm not too sure. Let me continue reading. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages. But have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In other words, Karl Marx is saying that we actually do not want to abolish private property, but we actually want to abolish that private property that is only owned by the meager 1/10 of the entire society. In one word, let me continue. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with the property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment and when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. This is very weird. This is actually very, very similar to the propaganda by Bernie Sanders, Alexander Cortez, the Democrats in America. They always espouse some very, very idealistic theory that is very hard to practice. Here, Marx is saying the same thing. Marx is saying that we don't really appropriate private property. What we want is only to stop a person, especially a bourgeoisie, to exploit and misappropriate the labor of others. Oh my goodness. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property. The standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc., your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason, the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain? In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by the parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools and etc. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at a community of women which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e. of prostitution both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality, The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. You cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations and his social life. I'll stop here. See you in another episode. Goodbye.